Chris Peaks and Chris Packus here talking a little college football. Yeah, we don't really know how much the first 2 weeks. I mean, I guess they don't do them anymore, man.
The big kickoff games.
Yeah, because you used to have a whole weekend spread out, and then they got it to where they was doing it over the first, 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, because you had the big Thursday night kickoff game. Then
Right.
You had Saturday. As the day went on, the games got better. You'd have an 11 o'clock game, a 3, and then whatever, 6, 7 at night. All of them being in an NFL stadium that was a neutral location, and it was always quality schools playing each other. I mean, just think of what we saw just a few years ago when Jalen Hurts had his big coming out party against Florida State.
Yeah.
So I always felt that when Alabama plays those opening games, I feel like they have a much better edge to them throughout the season. Because they were in on the kickoff games from the get-go back in like 2008. They started that. We played Clemson.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the following year we didn't do a big kickoff game. And I think 2010 we didn't do a big kickoff game. So I do remember that was our off year, 3-loss year. And then have done it every year since until last year. And now they're not doing it again.
But
This
I
year.
think it was like the second week. Let's say they kind of spread them out. They got to really spread them out over the first 3 weeks instead of all just piled in there. Because we still had Texas there. It was like the second or third game. But you're right. They've got to where now they're all gone. I don't understand why they.
It was always a great. Now I can understand where it would be in the interest of the players and the coaches not to do that because your first game, a lot of cobwebs you got to shake off. Injuries seem pretty frequent in those games. They're playing a competitive game for the first game of the season, and they're taking licks in practice, but not like game time licks. And I just feel like I saw a lot of injuries in those opening games. So maybe that's some of the motivation behind it. I don't know, but I know it was always a fun way to start the season off.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. One thing about Alabama though, think about it. They had some of those big kickoff games, but they got lucky at some of the times they caught some of those things. They caught Michigan when they were down, Southern Cal when they were down, Louisville when they were down. I mean, games that looked like marquee matchups.
Yeah. I don't think they ever were meant to be. Number 3 versus number 4. They were definitely games where, you had top 25 rankings, but it may be as drastic as one team is number 3, another team's 18, so you really don't ever feel that the top teams were in true jeopardy, but it was still more competitive than playing Akron.
Yeah. But when you think about back when we were younger and you had a number 25 team, it was nothing for them to pull off an upset against the number 1 or number 2. Now, once you get past the first top 5 or 6 teams, there's such a drop off. You might as well be playing in Akron.
Yeah, the gap between the better teams and that next tier is definitely widening. There's no doubt about that.
So this, I know the TV people are going to love it. The spreading for this playoff, and when it goes from 4 teams to 12?
I believe 12. Yeah.
I mean, you already see what the gap is between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And which
I don't really think it's going to solve much. Hey, when's the last time Alabama didn't finish in the top 12? So we're just guaranteed to be in the playoffs every year. So it doesn't bother me one bit. I've always said, hey, look, I don't want us to be champions because we just never got an opportunity to play somebody. No, I want to play the best teams and I want to win and I want to be a champion that way. So, and I don't, and that's why I don't understand some of the schedule complaining and stuff like that. I'm like, no, if you want to be the best, you've got to be able to beat everybody. Bring them on. Get rid of the cupcake games. Let San Jose State do their thing with schools their caliber. Let's say,
Well, I think
I mean, and it makes you better, play in these little, community colleges, where your third team scores on them at will. That's not going to make anybody better. I hate those games. I mean, they may be a necessity for player recovery, but I don't think I've watched even an Alabama cupcake game in about 5 to 7 years. I mean,
well, speaking of some cupcakes, we were talking about this earlier. What was I talking about? Some programs that have almost become cupcakes. I mean, what happened to the Miamis and the Nebraskas of the world? I mean, and even to an extent, I mean, I know they've had some good years, but the USCs and the Texases, I mean, these teams have almost become irrelevant.
Yeah, man, I feel like it's only going to get worse, because the way the college football landscape of today, I'm not saying this is why they did it, but the way it's set up, it's definitely in a rich get richer situation, because with the transfer portal, and I feel like today's players getting a little bit smarter, when we were growing up, I don't know about you, Chris, but for me, if I had any shot at college football, there ain't no doubt what school I'm going to. And that's Alabama. And that's with my heart, not my head. And I would have done it back, in the DeBose days. It wouldn't have mattered. Yeah. If I was going to be in a college football uniform, it would have been an Alabama football uniform. And I don't see a lot of that anymore. The schools aren't getting homegrown guys, and I don't know if it's the player that's gotten more mature and educated or if it's their parents, but these kids are making business decisions. I mean, look at what we've had at Alabama. Jalen Hurts was from Texas. Tua was from Hawaii. Bryce Young, I think he's from California.
Yeah.
And then now they got another California kid in there, and
McElwain was from Texas.
Say again.
McElroy was from Texas.
McElroy, yeah. So I mean, they're going where they know they're going to be featured the best. They want to be in the championships and the playoffs and let the NFL see that. And and with the transfer portal the way it is, it's like these smaller schools can't build a program because as soon as they get quality players, they're going to get snatched up in that transfer portal.
And with the transfer portal too, what changes, there's no more like, you remember Florida State back in the day, they rolled out a redshirt junior at quarterback every 2 years. Now you're playing as a freshman. There's no more redshirt and sitting on the bench for 3 years and riding behind people.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't understand. Especially with Miami and Nebraska. Let's start with Miami first. I mean, I don't know how I know that I think they don't have the greatest student body support, and their stadium's like 45 minutes away from campus. But man, you can't tell me you can't find 11 players in South Florida that can go out. It's not like they're playing this. They're losing to Duke. They're losing to North Carolina State. They're losing to North Carolina. I mean, this was a team that for 20 years, dominated college football, and I just don't understand how Miami can't find. I mean, for 350 days out of the year, these guys can be out on the beach with the finest women in the world, and I just don't understand how Miami can't get it back.
Man, I really think that when it comes to Miami, especially when they hire in a new coach, I hire him in expecting him to win immediately. And they seem to be very stuck in what Miami was rather than what they are. And, you got to give a coach time. It's like, that's the biggest problem. Like Tennessee did it for a while, let a guy come in 1 year or two. He ain't got it, get him out. They were kind of trying to call it like it was still 1994 Tennessee. and they just feel that they have all the moving parts necessary, and all they need is that right coach, and they're going to win a championship that year. No, it takes time. I mean, look at Saban, his first season, he's 7-6. His second season runs the season undefeated, but then loses the SEC championship and their bowl game, and then goes in the next year, goes undefeated, wins the national championship. You got to let them build a good program. And it may take, for somebody like Miami, who hadn't won anything in a long time, they've got to be patient. If a coach comes in and is 7-5, don't get rid of him. Just thank God you're not 2-10, and just say, hey, we're going to build from here. You might have a couple seasons that you're barely over 500 in the win column, but let it build the program, build a culture, let that coach build.
I think you're right about that. They got stability.
You need that stability. I mean, like, I would have never let Mark Richt out the door at Miami. I mean, I know that guy's got a reputation of winning most, but can't win the big one. But I think he's a great coach. You got to remember the big ones that he lost, who he was up against. That was definitely the prime of the Saban era. Alabama.
I think his heart just wasn't in it anymore.
Man, which that may be true. And I don't know, I don't know the full details of what caused him to leave there, but I tell you, one school that really intrigued me that you mentioned was Nebraska. And one of my earliest college football memories, is that I think it was 96 national championship when Nebraska just completely ran over Florida and touchdown Tommy Frazier. And they had a really good running back too. I can't remember his name. Is it Larry something? Was Larry Holmes maybe? I can't remember, but those two were dragging Florida players, and it was almost as lopsided as the national championship this past season. It was just a complete obliteration from the opening kickoff. And that's the Nebraska I kind of got introduced to. And once again, the program's got to understand they got a lot of rebuilding to do. And I don't know that today's college football, with the transfer portal and the name and image likeness stuff, I just don't know if it's conducive for a school like that to completely rebuild and come out of obscurity to be a presence. I mean, because if they get a good quarterback, and he has a good season, throws 20 touchdowns, well, he won't be there the following year. He'll enter the transfer portal, and because he wants to get a championship, and then, after his junior year, head to the NFL.
I'm surprised that nobody's running that offense, because like you said, things have changed, but that offense, when it's ran right, I mean, it's still one of the best out there. I mean, when they're running the option, it's beautiful. I mean, when they watch, I mean, they trap those guys to death. I mean, you got to have a quarterback that can run. I mean, but I just can't believe that nobody is running the option anymore. I mean, not one major program out there.
Well, I think that part of it is because defenses started picking it up. At first they really didn't know what to do with it. Then, we have several years of game film now. And I mean, if you give a good defensive coordinator, enough game film, he can come up with a plan to stop you no matter what you're doing.
That's true. But with nobody running it and you're not getting a look at it, I mean, you remember Saban talking about the Georgia Southern game. Remember?
The shit.
I guess y'all don't remember that. Yeah. So we had 8 players that. We could not stop them, man. Yeah. We could not stop them, and they gained almost 400 yards of rushing against Alabama. And that was, I mean, that's a division too.
Yeah.
If you're not going to look at that offense every week,
That
um,
yeah,
and then
that
you
that
look
was
those
that was
safeties
kind of
start
a
creeping up to the line, and then they burn you the 80-yard touchdown pass.
yeah, that they I think part of that was definitely I've seen Alabama play very poorly in that last game before the Iron Bowl many years because it's always a non-quality opponent, and it is I think they just have a hard. They're looking to Auburn. I mean, Alabama every year at that point in the season has a lot to look forward to. Because they got Auburn, then followed by the SEC championship. Those are two big weekends for them, and I just think sometimes they lose their focus and have difficulty paying attention to that team because they're looking ahead. Way too
We're
much.
talking about teams that came back or down or something. To me, and some people will probably disagree with this, but Auburn is the most underachieving school in the SEC. They are sitting right in a prime ground, fertile recruiting of Georgia, Florida, Auburn. They've got probably the toughest stadium, in my opinion, to play in.
Yeah.
In Georgia, a rabid fan base. They're loaded with money, and they have a good team every 10 or 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how? I don't get that.
I mean, that's been something that's baffled me for the last 15 years. I mean, another good, college football memory of mine are those outstanding Auburn LSU games that were every year. This is when, Jamarcus Russell, Jacob Hester, and what's that Auburn quarterback's name? Is it Brandon? I'm blanking on it, but
Brandon,
they had
Jacob Brandon.
I can't remember his name. But I remember we never beat him. He was in the midst of that 6-0 run that Auburn went on us. I can't remember his name, but he was good. And those were the best games of the year back then. And then, Auburn just it's either famine or feast with them. How do you go 2-10 a year after you played for the national championship?
I don't know. I can't understand.
Yeah, I mean, and if you look at those two national championship appearances, the 2010 when they won it and the 2013 when they lost it. I mean, the teams in between those championship teams were abysmal. I mean, it is shocking to me how they just go up and down, up and down, up and down. And I think they're also guilty of something a lot of the other SEC teams are, is they make their season about beating Alabama. I mean, think about it. Let's look at the season, the regular season losses Alabama have had here in this dynasty era. Now you got your South Carolina, 2010, did nothing after that. Then the Ole Miss teams, the Manziel A&M team, then the Ole Miss team 2 years in a row. None of them capitalized on that victory, and went into something else.
And think about this too. Got fired. Les Miles, he built that team for one game each season. They were built to play Alabama to his own detriment. Much like when you think I think it's happening at Texas A&M
right now. Yeah, with Jimbo.
Built to play one team all year long.
That's They I was really, first of all, Alabama was quite fortunate to have won that game this past season. The season before when they did lose, I mean, that was, I think Jimbo Fisher looked at it as his job hinges on beating Alabama. And in a way, that's what they've been taught because of people like Les Miles. Les Miles, those seasons that he lost to Alabama, I mean, they weren't exactly seasons where they lost 3 games. They were 1 or 2 loss team every year perennially. They 1 or 2 losses. That the only thing he didn't do was beat Alabama. And that ultimately cost him his job because LSU's like, nope, we want to beat Alabama. And they didn't care about everything else. So I mean,
You just touched on
college
something.
football has trained these guys. If you got to beat the top team to keep your job, and so they make it about beating the top team. You know,
And if you beat Alabama like Ole Miss did those 2 years in a row, and and Texas A&M did, you better make it to Atlanta.
Yeah,
I mean, you better go to Atlanta. If you don't not go to Atlanta, you're never going to go there.
well, you know, the Manziel A&M school win. You know, that was Manziel's freshman season, I believe. It was his first season starting.
Well, it was a redshirt freshman.
Okay,
but,
yeah. So, but they were a little rocky early in the season. They dropped a couple, you know, and then because he was a young player, they did get better as the season went on. And this was a late conference game for us because I remember it was right after the LSU game that year. So,
and if you remember that LSU game, we should have lost that one. Well, LSU held the ball like 40 something minutes, had like 85
that one was a tough one, but yeah, so Manziel kind of had to get into the swing of things, and I mean, because that was one where he just got straight up beat. You know, I've always said I can handle Alabama losing, but I don't like it when they play bad. Even when they win, it makes me feel like we lose. But they had a lot of, not to get off topic, but they definitely had a lot of ugly games this year. I mean, there was
that team could have been 6-6, just a few plays away.
Yeah, if you play, I mean, Texas, I'm sorry to say, if their starting quarterback doesn't go down, I don't think there's a chance that game that it was won, that we would have won that game. Texas A&M, man, got lucky on that one.
I mean, yeah, ball.
I mean, Tennessee. I really thought that pass interference call that would have sealed the win for us was one that, I mean, it was pass interference, but it was one of the worst calls. And the only call to me worse than that is that one in the Super Bowl.
What was their office coordinator's name? I can't think of his name. It always slips my mind. Last year, God, he just left
Alabama.
I would have punched Duval or
is it Brian? Who was it? Sarkeesian? It's not Sarkeesian. It's
no, God, he's Brian. It's Brad.
Brian. Too. Why am I not? Let's just find out.
Yeah,
we don't have our own Google agent like Joe Rogan yet, so I'm gonna do it myself.
Yeah, Google the defensive coordinator's name too, because if I had been Brad,
the defensive coordinator is Pete Golden.
Yeah, Golden was. But if I had been, what was that offensive coordinator? It always looks like he was the head coach at Penn State, head coach of the Titans. He's now the offensive quarterback at the Patriots.
Bill O'Brien.
Yeah. If I'd been Bill O'Brien, I would have punched him right in the face as soon as that game was over with for giving up 50. That was the best game he had called all year long, or since he's been there. I would have punched him dead in the mouth for giving up 52 points after that game.
They also gave up 6 touchdowns to one guy, and they were all like 50+ yard passes. I'm like, here's a new game plan. Everybody cover that guy. Okay, just. So what if they score? Don't let that guy score again.
Tackle him as soon as he comes off the line of scrimmage.
I know.
I'm penalty.
Yeah, holding every time. You know,
I'll take that penalty all day.
I leave somebody open, get 2 guys on him, for goodness sakes. That was one of the things that I thought was really missing on this year's team. I know there's a lot of controversy, you know, the thing now, whether it's, you know, sports, movies, whatever, we're not supposed to critique them. We're just supposed to sit and like it. But, you know, no, I will critique. I think that this last Alabama team was wasted talent because there's no doubt that their talent on that roster was incredible, but
And the sad thing
they
is they're
didn't
2 plays
execute.
away.
They didn't execute very well. They to let a team, which they did several times this year, to let a team move up and down the field like they're playing against the scout team. I'm sorry, I don't care how good they are. That's inexcusable.
And that team
That's
was
exactly what they
still,
did Texas until that quarterback. What's that quarterback's name?
oh God, I know who you're talking about.
Is it CJ something?
And but they were 2 plays and 4 points away from still being undefeated. I mean, that team, do you remember the LSU game? And I don't know what Golden was thinking when they tied that game. Alabama was rushing 4 and didn't have a spotter. And by the time the defensive players, they rushed past him, he had a wide open, nobody in front of him. Why do we not have a spy on that guy?
Man, I don't know that, but that's the biggest thing is the adjustments. It's like, can we try something different? Let's try this, I don't think that play is working. See that whatever defensive coverage schemes that Alabama runs, I think it works. I think that it's like one of those where it's like it's their version of Lacey up the middle. It's like, hey, you know what? That's not working. Let's try something else. Okay. That's it's
a coach
make some adjustments, and that I just when they're getting burned, it's like, hey, if you get burned in the first quarter, even the whole first half, that's what halftime is for. To pee and drink some water and make some adjustments. And I just felt like they came out flat every third quarter of this year.
And you make some good points.
They actually had the stats. I remember when they played Arkansas, they put the stats up of Arkansas's offense in the third quarter versus Alabama's defense in the third quarter. So you had the best third quarter offense up against the worst third quarter defense. And I'm like, what are y'all giving them in the locker room during halftime that they come out flat-footed like that? It was
you made a good point about adjustments and schemes and stuff. Coach, I remember a coach though who told me one time, and I still believe this, I don't care what kind of scheme you're playing, whether it's the spread option, whatever you're doing, the team that blocks and tackles the best is going to end up winning the game. And those are some of the things that I've seen on this Alabama team this past years. They couldn't, their blocking schemes, we couldn't get 4th and inches, we couldn't get that. I seen so many missed tackles in the open field. I mean, it's just this team was not just there was not a sound coach team is what I've seen in the past.
Yeah, and they had no pass rush.
No, not at all.
With these good quality quarterbacks and receivers, you can't just give them all day to figure out. I mean, they'll pick you apart every time. It doesn't matter how good your secondary is. Because one thing, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day whose son's playing football for the first time. And I was telling him, when I look at his son, I see a defensive back. And, I was telling him, I'm probably not at the high school level, but in the, collegiate, and then especially in the NFL, defensive back's got to guard an athlete that is far superior to him in every way. They're going to be faster. They're going to be taller. They're going to be maybe stronger, bigger and stronger. So they kind of have a real impossibility in front of them. So it's definitely a challenge for them, but there's no way if the quarterback's got all day to throw the ball that they can win that challenge with what they have to overcome to defend that receiver. If you give that quarterback all day long, there's just no way. You've got to put pressure on the quarterback. And I really feel like Alabama figured that out a long time ago when they were getting their butts kicked by the option, that, man, we have got to get pressure on the quarterback. And that's when, 2015 rolled around and we had that just outstanding line that scored more points than 100 teams did. 100 offensive did, that but that was the big difference is we were getting pressure on the quarterback. We were forcing turnovers, and it was a beautiful thing. I'm telling you, you gotta win the line of scrimmage. Got
Oh,
to.
that's what deserves the time. I mean,
Yeah.
And I think they're going to have it this year. Let's talk about some other teams in the SEC though, and about how they've been over the past few years. What do you think about? We'll start with one of my favorite coaches, no matter what people say, Kiffin. I mean, a friend of mine wrote an article on a few weeks ago and said so far he's been a bust at LSU and at Ole Miss. I said I totally disagree.
Mhm.
And we went through his record so far. I said he's done something. Yeah, no, he hadn't won a championship. No, he hadn't been Alabama, but he's made Ole Miss relevant. That people are paying attention to them. The fans are expecting to win. That's
Mhm.
this been a long time. If I've ever seen Ole Miss football being taken this serious by people.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of what I meant earlier about being patient, letting the coach build the program. This is this Kiffin's third year?
I think we're going into Kiffin's. This will be Kiffin's fourth season coming into this.
Fourth, okay.
Yeah.
So I think this would be they should have some high expectations for this one, but it depends on, you know, what team do you want to be? You know, if you just want to be a successful team, you know, he's probably going to be fine with them. But if they have these delusions that they think they're going to become the next dynasty in the SEC, I mean, I hate to break it to you, that's just not going to happen.
Well,
Like,
do you think that Ole Miss,
mhm.
since they put past, the Confederate battle flag and not playing Dixie and having, Colonel Reb on the sideline and put past the Confederacy image that hurt them for so long with black athletes, do you think it's possible now for them to win an SEC championship?
I mean, I don't, are they getting recruits more than they did before since they did that? Because, you know,
Kiffin's recruiting
they had
classes have been pretty
plenty
good.
of top quality black athletes playing with them before. You know, I mean, they've had some outstanding wide receivers. That defensive lineman that was an absolute terror. What was his name in Dichi or something? Yeah, you know, I mean, the guy they made the movie about, Jonathan Ogden. I mean, I don't know that, not to go into the political realm, but I don't think to those players any of that stuff meant anything. You know,
You don't
I
think,
mean,
but you don't think that hurt them years ago when you're playing, you got black athletes, they got the Confederate battle flag on the side of their helmet and you're playing Dixie and they're waving rebel flags. I mean, you don't think that had.
I really don't. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, you'd have to ask some of the people who
We'll look at it like this. Up
opted
until the
not to
60s,
go there. I
up
mean,
until
if
the
that's the
60s,
case, you could also make the argument that a lot of that stuff is the Southern culture, and until a couple years ago, it wasn't being removed from anything.
But think about
And
it. Up until say the late 60s, Ole
uh,
Miss was a national power. You're talking about they'd won 3 or
mhm,
4 national championships. They won
mhm.
conference SECs. And as soon as black athletes started being recruited, Ole Miss went to a second tier team.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
I mean, now I could see that affecting players in the 60s, you know, and maybe even the 70s too. I mean, when, you know, that you still had maybe a group that lived in the pre-civil rights era. But I don't know. I don't think it really has anything to do with present day recruiting.
Well, I think if Mississippi State get back into an SEC championship game, which they did. Now, granted, Alabama and Auburn was down.
Mhm.
That under the right circumstances, Ole Miss could too. Again, with Alabama,
I mean, I could see them making a trip because, you know, I really hope, as a diehard Alabama fan, I hope that Saban's got another championship or two in him. But
yeah,
the truth is we got to be honest that Alabama is, you know, they've been at the mountaintop for quite a long time, and I don't see them getting to that height again, but they could still be relevant, could still win a championship, but they are a program in decline.
I mean, I don't know
that's
if I agree they're in decline because I understand. I think the teams that have caught up with them because last year that 4-game road stretch they had with Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee, and was it Mississippi State? I mean, they went through a murderer's row that nobody could have survived those 4 weeks and came out unscathed.
mm-hmm.
I mean, and you're talking about again, 2 plays away from surviving that, as undisciplined as the team that was. Now, and I get what you're saying too. It's been like 5 years, or one national championship in 5 years. It's going to be harder for Alabama to do it. Do they still have?
Remember something too? Starting next year, we got Texas and Oklahoma over here now.
Yeah, that's
the SEC. We're gonna end up with a playoff that's got 10 SEC schools in it.
Oh, yeah.
That's another thing is the SEC seems to be. It used to be just Alabama, then it was Alabama and Georgia, but now Tennessee's becoming relevant again. Ole Miss and Mississippi State, they still
my
could
dark
make
horse team.
Huh?
I believe my guy who I believe is going to get them to a championship game. Not saying he's going to win one, but before he leaves there, I believe Mark Stoops at Kentucky is going to get them to an SEC championship.
You think so?
Have you watched them over the last few years?
They played great, but do you realize what they have to do to get to the SEC championship?
Yeah, and I want you to look at what they did over the last few years while they're playing Georgia. Those games have went from 38-0 blowouts down to like 32-14, down to 24-6. And I think last year the game was 16-6, and it was like 10-6 going in the fourth quarter.
But Kentucky also doesn't have a whole lot of head-to-head matchups with the West teams. That would help. That would help their cause a lot to play Alabama more often. To play Auburn, LSU. Kentucky is in the West, right?
No, they're in the East.
Oh, they're in the East. Okay.
Yeah, he's built a decent.
They see, but I think he can be number 2. But and this is a little bit of a question mark year for Georgia because they've lost their starting quarterback of 15 years.
Yeah.
So they're going to be starting over there, but they're still the team to beat. They're the first team to pull 2 championships in a row in the playoff era. And, I was reading one of the preseason polls, and they gave a reason for all of their selections like they do in a lot of the polls. And at first they had Georgia, and they said they lost a lot, but until somebody beats them, this is where they go, number 1.
I'll go with that.
What's really funny is that Ohio State game that they should have never been in the national championship because of that game, but then they go and completely obliterate TCU, but that is what made me realize how truthfully dominant the SEC is. Because look at it this way. Yeah. Now you had a very competitive first playoff game, TCU, Michigan, right? Then, Kansas State, who played TCU in their championship, competitive game. And then Alabama handles Kansas State. Georgia absolutely mauls TCU. So TCU had to get through Michigan. So, and that was a competitive game. But so you look at those teams, right, that come from the Big 10, that come from the Big 12, and then when they actually play the SEC in the playoffs, they just get murdered.
Annihilated.
And honestly, the Ohio State game, Georgia came out flat in that one. That was a total fluke. They should have lost it, but it was not. They played very poorly. And they didn't lose a game during the season, so they didn't have that thing to give them that jolt that I don't want to lose feeling. And I think they just let their guard down. And I think they should have beat Ohio State in similar fashion as to how they beat TCU by 4 or 5 touchdowns.
All right.
And
What I want to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just so what really is happening is those other conferences are just getting weaker. And you send what's probably their 2 best teams, Texas and Oklahoma, over to the SEC. That's just going to weaken the Big 12, or I guess it's going to be the Big 10 now. Well, we already have a Big 10. They got to come up with a new name or pull 2 more people in. But
and I also
Big 10 has been the same way. They come to the playoffs to lose to the SEC, and that those conferences are getting worse. And for a while, the ACC I thought was going to be that conference that rivaled the SEC, but they're starting their teams. Like Clemson was so dominant for a few years, but they're getting to where they're on the lower end of the top 10 now. Not that they're not still a great school, but they had the Watson era, then they had the Lawrence era, and then it was over. And
Alabama's scheduled this year. I was forgot to tell you this. Scheduled in between, I think it's LSU and Texas A&M, or maybe it's LSU Mississippi State. Alabama's got to go to Lexington in late October.
Okay.
I would hate to walk into that stadium. I think that could be a trap game for them.
That's going to be a tough one. That's gonna be a good game.
Be fired up. I mean,
that'll be an exciting one. When are you looking at the full schedule right now?
No, I was looking at it just a couple of days ago, and I seen.
A couple days ago. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends. When let's see. So we got Tennessee, and then you said it's late October that they're playing Kentucky.
October. It was at Kentucky. I mean, you see Saturday night, that stadium full. I mean, I'm not saying Alabama would lose it, but I think that's going to be a.
I just wonder who they're going to play. Wait, what is it that Tennessee is? Is it the second Saturday in October?
Third Saturday in October.
Third, that's right. Okay. So if they're going to Kentucky late October, that means they're going right into Kentucky after Tennessee.
Which should be a physical game. Mm-hmm. Alabama may still beat up. Kentucky fans are going to be going crazy. That could be a dangerous game.
That could be very dangerous because, then if they do it the way they've done it all these years, they'll have their bye and then go with LSU.
So tell me about Arkansas.
So that's going to be a real tough month for them.
What do you think Sam Pittman has done so far at Arkansas? I think he's building a winner there. I don't know.
Man, I thought Arkansas, it's another one of those where you got to really be realistic about the bar you set. Because I don't think Arkansas is poised to be dominant in the SEC because they're not going to get the players. They're not going to get the Alabama, LSU players. I mean, but they really looked great against several good teams last year. Didn't they have a big upset win there at the end?
They
beat
they almost beat LSU there at the end.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of, but I think
this is a problem with 3 SEC championship games.
I
think you're right about the bar being set. Obviously, where their bar is, but I mean, they've won 3 SEC West titles. I don't think it's too much to ask that they could compete every 3 or 4 years for a championship.
Yeah. Well, I think they could, but I mean, look what all they've got to overcome.
That's a lot to overcome.
There's a lot to overcome. I mean, that West, because I don't know how they're going to do it. Maybe even though Texas and Oklahoma are very far west, I don't know if they're going to move some. You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see them move Auburn out of the West and into the East.
They're saying they're going to do away with divisions.
Oh, really? Well, that would
Yeah.
probably be even better. But
Yeah.
so then are we going to be doing it like the Big 12 and just the top 2 teams?
Yeah.
And,
Top 2 teams.
Dude, I'm all for that. I would
I'm
love that.
because I think the top 2
would love that.
Because I've seen plenty of times the top, you have a 7-5 team make it, and
well, look at Mizzou. All those years they went to what, like 3 SEC championships in a row because the East had fallen so far down, and then Georgia, had a couple years where they got bit by the injury bug bad, and they dropped a lot of games they shouldn't have. Huh?
South Carolina went to an SEC championship game during that time.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, and at that point, and Georgia was like this for a while too. It was just about being the ones that the West ran over to hoist the trophy. It was just the formality. I mean, I don't think anybody thought, regardless whether it was Alabama, LSU, or Auburn, anybody thought those Mizzou teams were going to win those games.
Right.
I mean,
no.
Yeah, no, I mean, they were very fortunate, not to take anything away from them. I'm sure that they were great teams. I mean, you still have to be good to beat those quality teams, but they did happen to come in when, Georgia was kind of rebuilding, and Florida. I mean, Florida is another one that plummeted hard, and they've made a few resurgence in the later seasons. I mean, that was another win we were lucky to get away with.
Oh, yeah.
And in the SEC championship the previous year.
I know exactly what you're talking about. We were lucky to get away with that because at halftime I thought Alabama's fixing to just blow them out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then the way they came back, you're lucky. I mean, you're right. We were lucky to get away with that.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think it's going to be like without my boy Mike Leach gone, man? I love that guy. He was so funny.
Yeah. Man, that was a tough one, wasn't it? You don't want to see anybody lose their life. But man, I don't know.
Did you ever listen to him?
I've heard some interviews. I don't know that I ever listened to like a long form interview, but
one of the funniest things I heard, he was coming off the field halftime against Georgia, and the announcer asked him, said, Coach, that play right before halftime, how bad do you think it hurt your team? And he goes, well, how bad do you think it hurt my team? He said, you're the reporter. He says, why don't you go write whatever you think about it, and then everybody can listen to what you've got to say.
Yeah. So he was at Mississippi State, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mississippi State is one of those teams that, you go once again, going back to that Dak Prescott era, they mounted a few teams that you think, hey, you know what, they may do it this time. Yeah, I remember a couple of years before Dak was actually there. They actually had a season where they started off 10-0. It was another one of those seasons where they were fortunate enough to get some big schools that were in an off year, and they came to Tuscaloosa 10-0. Say again.
Is that the year Alabama beat them like 38-7?
Mississippi State and that was when they showed up, and I can't remember if it was in Tuscaloosa or if it was in Starkville. That game. They're holding up these 10-0 signs, we believe, whatever. And I'm like, I'm sorry. The only reason you're 10-0 is because you're playing Alabama later in the season than normal. And
I want to grilled them.
Yeah, just ran right over them. And then, of course, they came into Tuscaloosa again undefeated in, what was that, 2014 or 15 with Dak Prescott. And, I mean, and he just,
I believe if Dak would have
Alabama pulled off the win there, and then everybody was expecting Mississippi State to just kill Ole Miss, and they didn't. They got beat by Ole Miss too.
A couple of years ago, was their best shot in a long time. They had when they were up, I think 24-17 going in the fourth quarter. I thought Alabama was in trouble because they had the momentum. We couldn't stop them. And, when you get Alabama like that, you got to capitalize because you're not going to have any chances.
Yeah.
So the last team in the West, talk about LSU. What more can you say about them? They reach while they reload every year.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about Brian Kelly,
Well, I wasn't sure if that was the right fit. And but
I think LSU is going to be one of those that kind of hangs around. The loss to them this year, I don't even know what to say about that. That
endeared him to LSU fans, though. When he said that took some guts, man. For him
and I'm not taking anything away from LSU. They played great, but Alabama did not at all. They played horribly, like they did in against Texas A&M, Texas, and
that took some guts, though.
And, I feel like LSU is going to hang around, but I don't know if I see a championship on the horizon in the next 2 to 3 years, or even a good run at the championship.
Think about this: the last two LSU coaches that got fired won national championships. East. So we've talked about Georgia. We've talked about Kentucky a little bit. Let's talk about Florida, man. There's something I want to say about them. I remember Coach Bryant said they were the sleeping giant. But when you think about it, since Spurrier left, they had those championship years up under Meyer, but this has been an underachieving program.
Yeah. They were the same way. They had a one season where they were just awful and only won 2 or 3 games, and it's like, man, how do you lose your cupcake games?
What's his name was there?
Muschamp.
Yeah, Coach Boom.
Yeah, they did very poorly for several years, and they
I couldn't believe
they come back and they had these, because in the midst of those years they would have a championship or an appearance in the SEC championship. They'd win the East, and they are one of those teams that you just never know when they're going to suddenly resurrect. It really is pretty crazy. Hey, hold on 1 second. I've got to plug in again. Give me 1 minute. All right, I'm back.
Okay, yeah, Mullen. I was surprised he couldn't get it done there. Some guys are just better at middle of the pack road schools and can't handle a major job like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember, Curly Hallman. He did great at Southern Miss. 10-2s, beat Alabama and Auburn. Went to LSU, flop. 4-7, 5-6. Some guys just aren't made for those kind of schools.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying, though. That there's a big difference in a fluke win, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what all these upsets are. You got a team that beats a team that's better than them. And it's easy to be that underdog. And it's a lot harder to defend your place at the top of the mountain because everybody's gunning for you. So, these guys that maybe do have, some moderate success at smaller schools. And so the bigger schools are like, well, what could they do with our resources? But I can't really think of many situations where that's worked out.
Me either.
Old Franklin, that had done fairly decent at Vanderbilt, ends up at Penn State. Just doesn't really ever. Penn State's another school that, just was very dominant at one point in time and just, is pretty mediocre at this point.
Why does South Carolina put such high expectations? I mean, I didn't think they should have fired Muschamp. I mean, if you're going 7-5 at South Carolina or 8-4, what are they expecting?
I don't really know. I mean, but I remember that we talked about the Thursday night kickoff game.
Yeah.
There was one year they were that game, and they were playing Texas A&M. I believe it was Manziel's final year.
No, they rolled up like 600 yards of offense against South Carolina.
And they had, exactly it. And I remember going into that game, there was so much hype. All the announcers picked South Carolina to win, and they were interviewing the South Carolina coaches and the quarterback, and they just had so much anticipation for this season. Because they had that good season in 2010, and they really felt like they had all these pieces put together to capitalize on that great season. On that where they won the East.
National championship dark horse contender.
Mm-hmm.
They had that kind of hype on it, and you need to YouTube Spurrier's press conference after that. I mean, it was just great. What he said. He's talking about their new 3-4 defense. Anybody like that 3-4 defense? I mean, they just, and that was the beginning of the end of the Spurrier. But I remember exactly what you're talking about. I mean, there was so much hype on them.
There was, and then I really think where Spurrier lost the confidence of that program, whether it be the players or the supporters, was the way he handled that Jadeveon Clowney situation. When you remember that guy's junior year, that he was sitting out for half the season, and I wouldn't let a player get away with that. Be like, look, I know you don't want to get hurt, but you're a football player. Get your ass on the field.
I remember that.
And I don't think he really handled it right. I mean, Clowney had a full year of eligibility, and he only really played about 3 games. And, I mean, I can understand that decision for a player doesn't want to get hurt, especially when, they don't get legally paid, and it would cost them a lot of money in the NFL. But having played football myself as a competitor, I would never want to be on the sideline.
He was almost our coach.
Spurrier was?
Before Saban signed, Spurrier turned down a 10-year, $30 million offer to be the Alabama coach.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think Spurrier's a great coach, but I think that, and I mean, in a similar way, we could say that about Jimbo Fisher, that he doesn't know how to handle this current day athlete. I remember seeing
Jameis Winston.
Jimbo with Jameis Winston. Jameis just ran right over him. In Jameis Winston's last season with Florida State, there was one time they put the camera on him, and they're sitting there arguing, him and Winston. His players not listening to him. I mean,
remember when he was suspended and he came out in full uniform and he wasn't supposed to be dressed and he was yelling at Jimbo?
Yeah.
That would have been,
So
there's no
they
way.
they got to be able to control these guys, and I think that's the real reason people like Jameis Winston pass on Alabama. When they meet with these coaches, there ain't no way that Saban guy will murder me in my sleep if I talk back to him. I mean, that the guys that have a problem with authority, you know, they're never going to come to Alabama. And I say good riddance to them.
They asked Antonio Langham about Saban. They said, is his outburst the same as they was when he coached for him at the Cleveland Browns? He said, no. He said they wanted to fight Saban every day after practice. He said he's nothing like he was, 20 years ago. Texas A&M, I'll say something about them. That seems like a fool's errand for me. Again, recruiting base, rabid fan base, money, and every coach that's since the 80s, big name coaches have went there, have failed. Or Jackie Sherrill had a record contract of like 5 years, $4 million at that time. It failed. Franchione failed. Mike Sherrill, nobody, you can't win there.
Yeah. I mean, don't forget Manziel's sophomore year after his redshirt freshman year. We beat them that year, but it was a close game. It was a really close game. And,
yeah, I know
that. That team that played in 2014 was every bit as good as the 2013 team. And there's no reason they shouldn't have been in contention for the championship, but it's like they circled that Bama game on their calendar, and then that was it. And they made it about their season. They lost, and then they end up dropping a couple more, and Manziel might have even started doing some of that sit out stuff or threatening to or saying he wanted to or something like that.
Like the first or second game for disciplinary reasons.
Yeah. But
did you ever think, or at least I did when I was coming up, that Alabama LSU would turn into probably the premier game of the year? I mean, you see how many top 5 matchups they've had over the last.
Yeah. Not growing up, but going back to like the early 2000s when LSU was really starting to really build the program up. They got a couple championships, and at that point, I kind of viewed them as the team to beat because Alabama was in a down skid around that time. So, to me, LSU was the team to beat at that point until Alabama. Because LSU, even though they didn't really do great in the championships, that LSU era with Jamarcus Russell, Jacob Hester, that whole group, man, that LSU team's great. And they should have won several championships.
I tell you a game that they officials, Bama gets some, breaks, especially this one. I don't know if you remember, it was 2014, I think. And the score was 10-10. Yeldon fumbles the ball on the 3-yard line. LSU gets it. First play, they run it to the 1-yard line, and LSU player pushes an Alabama player, and they throw a 15-yard flag and backs LSU up. And anyway, they make it 13-10. Alabama ties and wins in overtime. And I just feel like that if that'd been an Alabama player, they wouldn't have made that call. Because I've seen so many times that for a pass to go up in the end zone, Alabama player and wide receivers, chicken fighting, and then I'm like, wait for it. 6 seconds later, you get that pass interference flag. You don't feel Alabama gets the breaks on calls sometimes?
Man, I don't. For one thing, watching it on TV, we don't see the whole field. And I know that they've been because the officials miss calls for everybody and make bad calls. And I'm personally of the opinion that, when it's a game-winning situation, unless it's totally egregious, and keep your flag in your pocket. Don't like. I know we're supposed to stay on college, but this past year, the Super Bowl, that was a great game. Nobody wanted it to end that way.
Oh, that was
On a penalty. Yeah, I mean, and one of the biggest things, I didn't realize this until I heard it the following day. But that defensive holding penalty was the only defensive holding penalty called that entire game. And, I heard someone pose a question, was that the first time a defensive back in that Super Bowl committed defensive holding? No, not at all. So
I agree with you.
why would the ref then be so inconsistent and throw a flag on something that's really easy to call? Because I mean, that's one of those defensive and offensive holding the same. You could almost throw that flag on every play.
Yeah, on every play. It's so minuscule, man. I mean,
sometimes I'll listen to Mark Schlereth. He's got his own podcast, and he was asked by his co-host, as a player in that situation, as a player that's been in Super Bowls, how do you want them to call the game at that point? And he said, I want them to call with consistency. I want them to call the game the way they've been calling it the whole time. And in that case, they didn't do it. They threw a flag on something. It was a legit defensive hold. But you should give the credit, for the yards to the defensive player, because even if he hadn't held the guy, that pass was so over that receiver's head. I mean, and it's like the ugliest game-winning pass in history is what it was.
And to have that Super Bowl decided on that, just
and dude, what we were about to get, they were about to kick the field goal and go up, and we were gonna get a 1 minute and some change for Jalen Hurts to go down the field and win the game. That would have been great, regardless of the outcome.
And it just made the great, let so much to be. Okay, is Tennessee finally back for real?
I don't think so. I think last season they had a very good quarterback. They had a very good receiver. They're both gone. Because take away that one receiver in the Alabama game, and you lose 600 yards. You lose 5 touchdowns.
Yeah,
he wasn't spreading the ball. That's what was so frustrating for me, is he wasn't spreading the ball. He was throwing to that same guy over and over and over again, to the point where I'm just like, look, just line the DBs up in the end zone. I don't care if they're on the 5-yard line on the other side of the field. Put the DBs in the end zone.
Tackle him.
Yeah, but those two guys, of course, the quarterback's name, Hendon Hooker, I think, and I don't remember the receiver's name, but those two guys, I thought, made that team last year. That they played good defense too. So
yeah, because they lost to South Carolina.
Say again.
I think you're right, because that team still lost to South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So was it one of those situations where all they cared about was beating Bama? But how do you not get motivated? Tennessee should have been in that SEC championship game. And I don't see how you don't get motivated for that game. It's like, I don't see how you can't dig down deep and say, hey, we got to beat South Carolina or we're not making it to that championship game.
What do you think about the Hugh Freeze hire at Auburn?
Man, my personal feelings toward Auburn aside, because when we worked at the restaurant and we're friends with Auburn fans, and when I had a roommate that was an Auburn fan, I would be nice to him about it. but I don't have one of those now. I hate Auburn. I hope they lose every game every year. But at the same time, they I do want to see our SEC schools and our state schools do well. And there's plenty of players I've liked from there. Cadillac, dude, that man put on a show this past year as the interim coach.
He held that team together.
He held it together. Every one of his interviews had me like wanting to run through a brick wall.
Dude, he had me fired up.
Let's do it.
He had me fired up. I mean,
he needs to be a motivational speaker once he's done with college.
And we watching those games, the crowd was feeding off him, and he was feeding off the crowd. I mean, it was electrifying to see what he did.
So I felt myself rooting for them for his sake.
I did. I was too. I mean,
I feel like Auburn is in a state of disarray and
stability.
They need stability, and I just don't think Hugh Freeze is that guy. I think they were on it with Hartson, but he ended up being, a little whatever.
I think Hugh Freeze is a guy that we've already seen with those two teams at Ole Miss. He still finished 9-4. I don't think he's the guy.
Good players. They were great teams.
And finished 9-4.
They should have been to the SEC championship both those years.
Yes.
And even their team that lost to Alabama that following year.
Oh, that's when they were up on Florida State like 31-6, up on Alabama 24-3. They were up on Auburn.
Yeah.
I mean, they were up, and they just had a losing season.
Yeah, I mean that was a really good team because that was a narrow victory.
Where I think Auburn made a huge mistake is I think that, and I'm not saying that he should still be there, but when they fired Malzahn, to me that was a bad fire because they didn't have anybody lined up. You got to have somebody lined up that you're ready to take over, and when that was a bad fire.
I think so because Malzahn, to me, he's another one of those. He's the offensive coordinator in 2010. They win a championship. He comes in 2 years later, first year coaching, takes them to the national championship. Then, that's when they plummet, and he's on the chopping block. He beats Bama. He gets a new contract. Following year, another bad season. He's on the chopping block again. He's fired. And I think even though those teams of his were extremely up and down, and I don't fully understand how Auburn gets beat by the teams they got beat that one year. What was it, 2012 when they went like 2-12 or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
I think they beat Sam Houston State and Louisiana Monroe in overtime. And those are the only two games they could muscle up the strength to win. And I mean, and that very year they had a competitive game, a 10-12 loss against LSU.
I believe had they won that game, I believe had they won that game, their season would have been different. I believe sometimes your whole season hinges on something like that.
They had already lost several games at that point.
Yeah, but I don't think it would have totally fell apart.
No. But they were losing their cupcake games.
Yeah.
And being upset by one cupcake team is one thing. But losing to all of them, I mean, give me a break. I mean, isn't this still a D1 football team, even though you're having an off year? And I just think that Auburn, I feel like they made a mistake getting rid of Malzahn.
I do too. I think it was a bad
Malzahn. They should have kept him, created that stability. Somebody like Cadillac that's got all this emotion, perfect, assistant coach. maybe even to be groomed and mentored by a guy like Malzahn to one day take his place or go get a coaching job somewhere else. But that may be what they need to do. They need to plan on Cadillac being the future. And
Auburn was going to hire Kevin Steele. It was a done deal. And it fell apart. And I was thinking, if you're going to fire him out, this is what you're going to just promote the defensive coordinator. I mean, that's who you wanted to get. You was going to fire Malzahn for him. The guy was 1-31-1 in Baylor. And Malzahn was 3-5 against Saban. I mean, of all the coaches out there, I mean, he beat him. Talking about Cadillac, man, if I'd been like a Northeast, whatever, Louisiana, I'd have been looking at that guy because he's going to fire his players up. If you could have got some good coordinators.
This is one very rare time where they keep the interim coach on staff without actually making him the head coach.
They had to.
That is I think they should make him their future, honestly. Don't worry about the fact that on the technical game, he may not be there, may not be ready. You don't really need a head coach to do that. You need a strong offensive coordinator, strong defensive coordinator.
Right.
And you need a head coach that gets these guys in the headspace to win. And I think Cadillac can do that. And if we do go to this no conference look for the SEC, I hope one day we're able to play Auburn for the SEC championship.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
That would be incredible. And that's been one of my dreams, is that I wish that Auburn would go to the East so that we could play them in the SEC championship one day. And if we go the non-conference thing, or the non-division route, then that's a possibility. But they've just got such a long way to go. I do know that I've got family that are big Auburn fans, and they were all really excited about Hartson. Now, where he lost the fan base, I'm not really sure. But, this past year obviously was a complete bust. And, his first year.
He should have hired some more SEC people. Guys that had inroads in these states with the high school coaches. Derek Mason was like the only guy he had. Let me ask you about something else though. Something I'm excited on the college football side to see. Coach Prime. What's Coach Prime gonna do?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I think it's going to go one of two ways.
I have been watching Deion Sanders.
Either it's going to go really good or it's really bad.
Whether it's been him playing baseball or him playing football or him as a commentator. I mean, I've been watching that man now for 30 years, and man, outstanding athlete, outstanding energy. Him referring to himself in the third person as prime time this, prime time that is this is a little tidbit, wrestling tidbit. That's what gave Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson the idea to refer to himself in the third person. Deion was doing it first. He's got an incredible amount of confidence. And that's saying it nicely. It's probably more like arrogance. And that, I think, if he can transfer that energy to his players, I think he'll put together some good teams. But let's face it, he's not going to be putting together a championship team at Colorado.
They've won. Colorado's won a national championship.
Well, how long ago was that?
That was up under Bill McCartney in the 90s. I mean, he had 50 players come from the portable transfer. He put the number 23 recruiting class. I think if this guy can get the players in there, I've watched I follow his stuff on Facebook. he's put assistant coaches in places and are letting them coach and doing what they're supposed to do. And he's being that CEO type. And I didn't realize this guy, he kicked a player out of the locker room because he had the wrong color socks on. He said, "I'm old."
Nice. Now,
And
did that give you any Jim and Nick's flashbacks?
he said, "I'm old school. I'm old school."
Yeah.
He, he said he blamed today's parents. He said, "You're the ones making these kids, weak."
Yeah. I love it, and I hope he does well. I don't think you're going to be able to build a championship program in Colorado.
Is he using that as a stepping stone to go back to Florida State?
I think so. That's where he needs to end up to truly make an impact.
If Florida State called, he would go home.
Yeah. Now the question is, will they? Or do they think he needs to prove himself? But here's the thing: you only get that one chance. All these guys that go to their alma maters to coach. It's like Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. Once it doesn't happen and you get let go, you don't get another chance. So you want to make sure they don't bring you back. So if your ultimate destination is Florida State, you got to make sure you're ready for it when you take it on, because you don't want to go and, sign a 5-year contract and get optioned out after your 3rd year, which is what happens to most coaches now. I mean, most of the coaches' salaries being paid now are coaches that aren't even coaching for the team they're cashing the check for.
Do you remember when the signature thing was $1 million contract? Like, we only had I think Bobby Bowden and 2 other coaches, maybe Lou Holtz, had $1 million contract, and that was the signature thing, to give a guy $1 million contract. And now you've got analysts making that. I mean,
now it's that the millions, the change in Saban's couch.
Well, you said you talked about coach a while ago, and you said that about going to your alma mater, DeBose. Are you surprised that he finished out his career the way he did, going and coaching high school and junior college? And I mean, I figured this guy would have went back to the NFL as a defensive line coach, or would have ended up like Bob Davie did, end up like a New Mexico State or Akron as the head coach. I'm surprised he ended his career like that.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about Nike DeBose. I remember that what was impressive about him is that he ran a strong defense as the coordinator under Stallings in a time where Alabama was consistently in the beyond number 15 in the top 25, but not in the top 15 usually. So they weren't getting.
Remember now, that's different. Stallings was up there, man.
Well, towards the end of after 92, 93, 94, they were usually outside of the top 10. So
in 96, they were Stallings last year, they were like 7-1 or 8-1 and ranked number 8 and lost to Mississippi State. They were up 16-3 going in the 4th quarter. Yeah. But I mean, I guess I know what you're saying.
But they weren't. It wasn't the Alabama of today, is what I'm saying. Yeah. And you weren't getting 4 and 5-star recruits. So he built a strong defense without that. Without guys coming from Hawaii and Florida and Australia like that. Jesse, what's the one that used to always have the crazy face paint? The Australian guy, or New Zealand or something like that. So he didn't have that. He pretty much was having to stay in the state and having to put together a good, strong team. And Alabama did play good defense back then. And I mean, they weren't what they are now, the top 3 defenses in the country every year, but they were pretty darn good.
They were.
And, I don't know that.
Is that the first year you remember? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Is that the first year you remember? 93? I mean, 96?
96.
Yeah, as far as when you started following football?
Oh no, I mean I follow. That's when I got more serious about it because that's when I started playing high school football. But I mean I followed football, my whole life. I watched the '92 season, the championship season.
You think that's the best defense they've ever had?
No, I think the two Alabama defenses that I would put up against all others are the 2011 defense.
Oh yeah.
And then the 2015, 2016 defenses with Jonathan Allen on the line and I'm blanking on some of the other names, but those were outstanding defenses, Wildman,
Do you remember
Tim
the national
Smith,
championship
just
game against Miami when Alabama played Miami? Do you remember the national championship game when Alabama played Miami?
yeah, where George T got that little strip
Yeah,
tackle.
but you remember that's the play that never happened, right?
Huh?
Do you remember? But that's the play that never happened.
What do you mean?
Alabama was offsides.
Oh, really?
Yeah. People have forgot about George T ran him down and took the ball away from him, but Alabama was offsides.
Why do I have a picture of that in my hallway?
I swear, man, it's the play.
They marketed that crap and did that.
And Bama was offsides.
Well, I'll be darned. Maybe it's time to rewatch that game.
Do you remember the defense Alabama ran when they lined 11 people up on the line of scrimmage?
Yeah.
They called that. They said they hadn't even put that. They didn't even practice it. Oliver put it in like a couple of days before, and they called it cover zero. And they said when he finally called it, the players are going nuts. And they walked up there, and he said they could just see fear in Gino Torretta's eyes. And first play just threw the ball away, and the second play called a timeout and asked his coaches upstairs, what are they doing? They said, I don't know. Give us a couple series and we'll figure it out. And they said, by that time the game will be over.
But that 2015 defense that scored all those, what did they score? 15 touchdowns that year on turnovers.
Oh God.
That defense was just, man, the great D-line, great pressure, top of the country in sacks. They were really, really dominant. I mean, I like the 2011 defense mainly because of the whole 50-yard line thing with LSU in the championship that year. And
Alabama's game plan in that was so phenomenal because they came out faking those runs, faking and having him bootleg and hitting those tight ends in the flat. And I remember Les saying he didn't know what to do. Well, they should have never lost that 9-6 game to them.
They shouldn't. What did we miss? Like 3-4 field goals. I mean,
from 50 yards plus instead of punting.
Yeah, and that
when he took the ball away from him on that.
There's one thing about that game of the century, what that they refer to it as, that really bothered me. Alabama had the ball in the red zone for the first time of the night. Now, obviously, I love Saban. Don't know if he made this call or the then offensive coordinator made this call, but if we're up against the other number one team, in college football at that time, and we're in the red zone for the first time of the night, I can't remember if it was the third quarter or the fourth, we finally got a chance to score. And what play do they run?
They threw a swing pass to Lacey, didn't they?
No, they toss it to Marquise Mays. He throws it in the end zone and gets it picked off. And
okay, I remember that.
I'm like, look, I know those you were thinking trick play, but who do I want to have the ball in that situation? I want my quarterback, because if the quarterback's not suitable for that situation, then he's not suitable to be the quarterback.
It
I
was
would have
overtime
wanted
when they
in
did
that
that.
real game time situation right there that probably would have won that game.
It was
I don't
overtime. They
care
threw
how
the
good the
swing pass.
defense is. I want the guy who throws, you know, throws
They threw a swing
passes for a
pass. Their
living
first
throwing
play
it.
in overtime, they threw a swing. They attempted a swing pass out of the backfield to
Mhm.
one of the backs. But that was their first play in overtime. But they made, I can remember when they played Texas A&M with some of Manziel year. Alabama had the ball first and goal on the 6, and 2 out of our 4 plays were passes. Like, give the ball to Lacey 4 straight times up the middle.
Mhm.
I mean, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of these coaches outthink themselves. I mean, I
Yeah.
get
That play's just always bugged me. I'm like, that is the worst possible play you could have called. I mean, and you got to coach. If you're going to try that stupid stuff, you got to coach up that receiver. Hey, if it ain't there, don't try to thread it. Throw it out of bounds.
I don't like trick plays.
I don't either. I can't stand the flea flicker, and the halfback pass thing is for the birds. I'm sorry. I don't want my halfback throwing the ball. I just don't, because you get stuff like that where he threw it into very tight coverage, and
What do you think about the Wildcat?
man, I think it's a dead giveaway. You're going to run the ball.
But remember that South Carolina game?
Yeah.
I mean, they put Ingram, just lined Ingram up in the Wildcat.
But that was the fourth quarter. And they were bumped and bruised by then. And I mean, not that it didn't have its successes, but I think in order for it to work, I think you've got to have the quarterback on the field. So at least the potential for the halfback to toss and it be a pass is there. But I think it's also, I don't really like it when a team adopts it as its primary formation. But for it being there, like if you notice, they use it, the Tennessee Titans use it now with Derrick Henry a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not
one. Like you said, who's getting the ball.
Yeah. I mean, which it's like if the Tennessee Titans are third and less than 3, it doesn't matter if it's wild caught or not. Everybody knows what's coming. They're going to give that ball to Henry. And so in a situation like that, that's like one of those, kind of where like in baseball, where the batter knows the pitcher's coming with heat. And the pitcher knows the batter knows he's coming with heat. And it's like, I'm giving you my best number 1. You try and get it. And that's what I think you're saying when you do the Wildcat. You need to have a formidable back, and you need to just say, hey, look, just like a 4th and 1, they're running the ball. We're coming right up the middle. We're challenging you to stop us.
Going over my best lineman.
Mm-hmm.
My best
I don't think I would like to know how many passes out of the Wildcat were intercepted, because I'm willing to bet it's quite a bit. Because you got the guy who doesn't usually throw the ball, throwing the ball, bad things will happen.
What do you think? No other coaches does this, but I tell you, it drives me crazy. And when we finally weathered the storm, I can't believe we were only down 10-0. But that up-tempo stuff that Kiffin does the first half of the game, man, that drives me nuts. I mean, I would have thought we was down 42-0 because we could not stop them.
Yeah. Well, tempo has always been an Achilles heel for Alabama. I think, and honestly, I think one of those reasons is that, Alabama under Saban has had a very sophisticated defensive scheme, and they like to sub a lot, and they like to change formation a lot. They like to send in their dime package, their nickel package, their 3-4. They play strong situational football. So when you're going up tempo and you don't give them a chance to make those subs, make the blitz calls, things like that, and they just got to line up and play, man, for any defense, that would be tough, because that's not just Alabama's style. That is the style of today, is that offenses are changing it up so much.
Remember Kiffin's first game against Alabama?
Say what?
Remember Kiffin's first year against Alabama? The final was like 59 to
the popcorn
49
game.
Yeah, we could not stop them, man. Every time I looked up, I was running for 50. But they went up tempo. They were snapping the ball in 2 or 3 seconds. We was out of position. I thought Alabama was going to lose that game, and that may have been his best opportunity to beat them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the Super Conference for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Gene Stallings saying when Texas A&M Missouri joined the league that one day there would just be 4 super conferences, and the bowls would be gone. The 4 conference champions would get a automatic bid. Then you'd have 4 at large. It'd be 18 playoff. We see we've already passed that. I think we're going to come to something where it's like the NFL, where we only have 32 or 48 teams playing, and we get rid of like the Vanderbilts, the Northwesterns, the teams that are just not any good, and we have the best of the best.
Yeah. I would like, that's the way I've always thought, is like, we can really simplify this playoff thing. Take the conference champions. I know that we've been the beneficiaries of not winning our conference championship before. And just like Georgia lost their conference championship 2 years ago and got a second shot in the playoffs. But I'm fine saying, hey, if you don't win your conference championship, to me, the conference championship starts the playoffs. It's the way it is in every other sport. Huh?
There was 2 national championships we had. We didn't even win our division.
Yeah. So, yes, we've benefited from it, but I'm fine with the rule change. Make it a super conference. If you want to be in the playoffs, win. It's that simple. Let's make a four super conferences. The 2 teams at the top play for the championship. The winners all move on to the playoffs.
Here's
what I like to do.
I'd like to see it go this, and these conferences go into 4-team pods. Mm-hmm. And those 4-team pods, the 2 best teams play, and out of those 4 teams, then you have the championship game.
Mm-hmm.
Because they was originally talking about that, like Alabama, Auburn, I think Vanderbilt and Tennessee was going to be in a pod together. Mm-hmm. And the winners of those 4 was going to play a 4-team playoff, and then the conference championship, and then go into the playoffs. The only thing about that is you're going to have to play those home games, and fans are not going to be able to travel all those games.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of grown tired of the whole playoff thing. And so I don't know why we don't just do a traditional playoff system. The 4-team playoff is not a playoff. All that is BCS times 2. It's seriously, it's BCS just adding 2 spots. And they basically added a semifinal round. And
you this when they asked him, Coach Bryant, and he was so prophetic. It was like 1980 or 81. They was asking Coach Bryant about the playoffs, and he goes, well, he said, with the advent of TV and money, he said, there's going to come a time that we have to have playoffs. I hate to see the bowl games go, blah, blah, blah. But, he was predicting it way back then.
Yeah.
That it was coming.
It's certainly better than the old system, because, like, in the old system, the BCS system, you get things like Alabama, Notre Dame, but at the same token, here in the playoff system, last year we got a 65-7 Georgia over TCU championship game.
That was.
I mean, I don't think that
they were not going to rest until they got a team in there from that. I mean,
from that conference, but like
Cincinnati a couple years ago.
I think it's kind of impossible to evaluate because you remember 2015 or 16, I can't remember which, when Alabama played Michigan State in the semifinals.
31-0.
Yeah. A few weeks earlier in their conference championship, Michigan State and Iowa had one of the greatest games I've ever seen.
Was that the 22-play drive?
I'm not sure, but I think the final was like 10-7 or 13-10 or something. It was
like
an outstanding defensive game. But 22 you got to ask yourself, when you watch a game that's very competitive, is it competitive because both teams are good, or is it competitive because both teams suck? And that's a possibility too. Two, moderate teams are going to have a great game too. And so they have this just incredible game to finish out their season. And Michigan State comes out on top. They pick them for the playoffs. Alabama just completely obliterates. So,
well, like that year they went undefeated and they had all the hype on Notre Dame. And
yeah.
that was the greatest defense in history.
Yeah. I mean, and anybody with two eyes could have watched and seen that they did not play the caliber of teams that Alabama and Georgia, LSU, Oklahoma, all those other teams play. They didn't even play the caliber of teams that Ohio State and Michigan played. And they pretty much, they had no conference championship, and they finished out that season 10-0, knowing they were going to the national championship. While every other team had to fight in their conference championships for that opportunity. And
Alabama
that's the year that Alabama and Georgia played in one of the most exciting games. Yeah. That was a great game.
I'll never forget what's the quarterback. Can't think of his name. He's running down the sidelines after he completes that pass, and he's giving the signal to snap, to spike the ball. And Rick goes ahead and calls the play. Why did he not spike the ball? I mean, you've got Alabama's defense reeling. They're on their heels. I mean, maybe that's what he was thinking. I've got on their heels. I'm going to call a play and try to win it here. I don't know. I think you spike the ball and call your best play in that situation.
I don't know. It's tough because they were doing the tempo, and that's where they were being, because remember they had a very near pick. What's that little guy's name? I should have researched names before I did this, but that one defensive back from Alabama, he nearly intercepted it at the very start of the drive. And ever since after that, they went tempo and were moving the ball down the field.
I thought the call was a great play, play call. Well, he just happened to tip the ball.
Yeah, I mean, CJ got his hand on that ball and
he caught it.
Yeah, I mean, if the guy had to let it hit,
that's your instinct.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe the receiver never saw it. He thought it was it might have been a lateral or something, and instinctively went to the ball. But yeah, that was a pretty wild fit, and they still had time on the clock.
They could have called one other play.
I was really thinking.
I think they
might be able to get off one more play, but then the Alabama players started jumping up and down and celebrating. But man, that was a pretty outstanding.
And they would have killed Notre Dame too.
Oh, they would have killed Notre Dame too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they would drill them.
I mean, if we had played that Georgia team 4 times, I think it would have been 2-2. I mean, it really, I think that
it could have went either way.
team was every bit as good as that Alabama team.
I agree with you. I mean,
They
because
were real good. That was
they were up
Rick's
20,
best.
yeah.
That was Rick's best Georgia team.
And he had some good Georgia teams.
He has some good ones, going back
And I
to
don't
the
think Georgia
Stafford
fans
years.
appreciate
Yeah,
them
he had
as much as they
some
should.
really strong teams. I wish I could remember that Alabama defensive back's name. He was really good. He had an interception in the national championship too, I think.
Do you know when Alabama has started really? I mean, they've won, still got some championships, but look at Alabama's Saban, his record, pre-Kirby and post-Kirby.
Well,
Kevin Skarbinski had a write-up on that. It shows what Alabama's done since they've lost
Yeah,
Kirby.
I think Kirby was a great defensive coordinator. But that being said, he wasn't the coordinator of that 2015-2016 defense that played well.
I don't think he's a great in-game coach, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the Alabama game. Jay finally beat them, but they were running the ball, or throwing it the first time in the championship game. They're throwing it. Holmes throws an interception. What's he do? Starts running straight in the teeth of that Alabama defense. He panics against Saban every time, and he goes against what's been working. I don't think he's a great in-game coach. I mean, does that mean he's never going to be one? I don't know. I mean, he's won 2 national championships. I mean, but Georgia should have been better than this a long time ago. They had nobody to recruit against, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they're high school football, and they were an 8-4 team before Rick got there. I mean, Dooley had good teams, but he was an 8-4 coach. And he was supposed to be at Auburn.
Yeah.
And Dye was supposed to be at Georgia. I bet Dye wishes they would have taken that job now.
Yeah.
Because you said so 92 was there. You said, how old are you?
41.
Okay, so I'm 46. Okay. So when I started really keeping up with it, I can vaguely remember the end of Bryant. And I can remember the first game I ever went to was 84. LSU beat Alabama 20-14. We lost to Vanderbilt that year. You don't lose to Vanderbilt.
You shouldn't. Yeah, I remember some of the Curry years, but I remember a lot of the Stalling years. Stallings was a fun coach. Yeah.
And the coach that I think all Alabama fans pulled for the most, I know you don't remember him, but I remember when Sheila played quarterback, and we wanted him to succeed, man.
Yeah, I did. I wanted Sheila to.
We pulled for him.
Yeah, because he was one. I remember not necessarily like on the national platform, but the local talk when Francione left. Everybody wanted Shula. And then they ended up going with Price, the guy that, was with the hooker. And then they had to go with Shula at that point. But we wanted him before we heard about Price.
Well, really, in all fairness, he should have got the job.
Yeah, it should have gone straight to him, I think, because I remember I don't really remember having high hopes for Price anyway.
No, when they fired Price, they interviewed 2 people, and who, in all fairness, should have got the job was Sly Croom. When you put the resume,
I heard a rumor. I don't know if it was true or not. It was before social media, but I did hear a rumor that Bill Parcells
Parcells wanted the
was
job.
very interested in the job before they went with Saban.
You're exactly right.
And that would have been interesting, but when they hired Saban, I only knew him from I had seen a few interviews of his on ESPN when he was with the Dolphins, and knowing what I know about him now, it's kind of funny looking back on those interviews because he was complaining about the discipline of his players. and I'm like, yeah, when old that defensive lineman that played for Miami for so many years.
Did he make cry?
Say again.
The one that Saban made cry?
I don't know I don't think, what was his last name? Jason
Taylor.
Yeah, Jason Taylor. I saw him on Hard Knocks pulling up in a Maserati. So I'm like, if he pulled up and they got out of that Maserati when Saban was his coach, I think that it would have driven Saban crazy.
He just wasn't meant for that.
Yeah, and I they did Miami on Hard Knocks several years ago, and I remember watching and just saying, okay, I could see how Saban didn't fit in here. Because I mean, they do their camp at least they did at that time at like a 5-star resort. In between practices, the guys are hanging out by the pool.
Yeah. I mean, they're not.
Yeah, Saban would have hated that. Yeah.
It's like Lou Holtz, when it is one time in the NFL. Some guys are just not meant to, these are men. They're not boys you're coaching anymore. How are you going to get somebody's face and start screaming at them, when they're making 3 times as much money as what you are?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, it's just so much different. Price, when you was talking about him a while ago, I think that would have been a disaster.
Yeah, I didn't see. I think he would have been another DeBose. Probably a nice little Southern gentleman, but can he coach football? I don't know. I don't think
when
so.
Rich Rod led us down the aisle, remember that? Rich Rodriguez, he had accepted the job, was on his way to Alabama, and then backed out. And then that's when after Saban, I mean, if we'd have got stuck with Rich Rod, that would have been a debacle.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly appreciated having Saban. I don't know how many more years he's got in him, but I think a lot of people that are not in Alabama don't realize how many bad years we had leading up to this. And it wasn't that long ago that we were threatened with the death penalty and and suspended and all that, and it was just a rather dark time. And
the dark years is what I call them.
Yeah, I mean, we had the championship in '92, pulled off that SEC championship in '99, and then just had a very quiet 2000s. And
for 25 years, Alabama was mediocre. Like you just named it, they had an SEC title in '89. But our biggest problem is the coaching hires that we made. I mean, look at the guys that we hired. The one that we how they messed this up, I don't know. Guy Hunt told him he had the job. President Joe Ab Thomas told him he had the job. He leaves Birmingham after a bowl game thinking he's going to sign a contract, and Bobby Bowden walks into a room full of people to interview him. Well, after he was promised. I mean, can you imagine if we'd have got Bobby Bowden in 1987 when he was hitting the prime of his coaching career? I mean, Alabama would
have been a different story.
Oh God! I mean, and they hired Curry, and then Stallings did a great job at Alabama. I mean, averaged 70 wins in 7 years. While they hired DeBose, back in those days, though, remember you had to be one of Bears boys. You had to play for the Bears. The one they should got,
and that was also the time where it was almost customary where if your head coach left, the next coach was coming from the staff. That it just happened that way a lot.
The one they was going to sign that they were in negotiations and it fell through was when they fired DeBose was Jackie Sherrill.
Mm-hmm.
But they was too afraid of Sherrill because he cheated Sherrill cheated.
Well, I didn't mind. I actually liked old Francione, but of course he did us wrong the way he left.
But let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. If you're going to leave a program, how are you supposed to leave? Is there a right way to do it?
Yeah, I think the players were really put off by the way he did it. It's like, hey, didn't we roll together for the last few years? Just at least come and talk to us. Here's a crazy story. I don't know if you ever heard this one. The punter that year, Lane Beard, he and I went to high school together. And I heard through some mutual friends of ours that, because Lane tore his ACL that year, but it was on his non-kicking leg. So he still kicked, more than he should have. Maybe it was his MCL. I can't remember. But he was putting off surgery. It was a senior year. He was finishing the season. And as soon as the season was over, he's in surgery. So one of the recruiters stopped by to see him. And he's asking, well, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I was out on the trail. So now I'm visiting you because I was in the area. He's like, can you recruit right now? And he's like, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, you don't know? Coach Francione resigned. So he didn't even let the coaches know. And so, yeah, I think if that was the job he wanted, that's great, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Well, Tupperville's way, he had 2 days before he left Ole Miss. He said the only way he was leaving Oxford was in a pine box. And the other one was he was at a recruiting dinner and he had 2 players, was at Texas Tech, 2 players he was recruiting. They was eating. He gets a phone call, excuses himself. Cincinnati offers him the job and he leaves them sitting there at the table. At least paid for the meal, man.
I know. He totally dined and dashed on them.
I was never
there's certainly, I don't know. I feel like there's always been this kind of crazy rivalry with A&M, because first you had Bear Bryant, Gene Stallings, and then finally somebody went from us to them. And
Bryant had a moment like that at A&M. They were undefeated and ranked like number 2, and then he had already accepted the Alabama job. Mm-hmm. And was trying to keep it under wraps, and it came out, and they lost their last 2 games.
Yeah.
Do you know I don't know if you know this story right here, but how things would have been different? He accepted the job, head coaching job in Arkansas, and where he was from. Mm-hmm. And on his way back from after accepting it, he heard on the radio that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And he went and joined the Navy. Mm-hmm. But how things might have changed then. Would he have left Arkansas to come to Alabama?
Man, I don't know. Hush.
And then he accepted the job at the Dolphins in either 69 or 70. And accepted the job, and then changed his mind overnight and had asked for his job back. Could he have made it in profile?
I don't know, man. I'm glad that he didn't make that move, and that we did end up getting him. Definitely a lot of good years. So
you ever seen Walter Lewis? You know who he is?
Who's that?
Walter Lewis. He was the last quarterback that Bryant had, and he played in for Perkins for a couple of years. But in the last game of the Liberty Bowl, Bryant's last game, Bryant made some substitutions, and Lewis didn't like them. And he started yelling at Coach Bryant, got his face on the sidelines. And Coach Bryant grabs him by the shirt and pulls him over there to him and sticks his game plan in his up under his face mask, sticks it right there and says, boy, I'm still the head coach on this team, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, man, 10 years earlier, you've been picking yourself up if you yelled at that old man like that.
Yeah, there was a really good show that came on ESPN. Probably been about 20 years ago now. It's called the Junction Boys, that profiled Bear Bryant going to Texas A&M. And I remember watching that, and actually Tom Berenger played Bear Bryant and did a really good job. And it really showed you why he was such a good coach,
Well, I'm surprised one of them coaches back then didn't get somebody killed. I mean, they had those players out there for 3 hours with no water. I mean,
yeah, man, that crap wouldn't fly today. They wouldn't even watch the show.
No, I mean, I'm surprised they didn't get killed. I mean,
yeah.
Well, Tyler Curry in '89, Alabama made it to the Sugar Bowl. They were number 4. Miami was number 1. Prince Wembley scores a touchdown and comes to start celebrating, jumping up and down. And he comes to the sideline, and Bill Curry catches him by the face mask. And they are nose to nose, and he's got his finger inside there. Can you imagine the fan reaction today if a player grabbed somebody by the face mask?
Yeah, it's not like it used to be. But yeah, the old Bear didn't like celebrations either. I remember, was it Ozzie Newsome that caught his first NFL touchdown pass and spiked the ball? And he said after the game was over, he called Coach Bryant and apologized for spiking the ball. And he's in the NFL. Yeah, he's in the NFL now. Rookie season, touchdown, spikes the ball. And the first thing he does is call Coach Bryant. Like, I don't know if you saw, but I'm sorry.
Watching this thing about 100, 100 years of football or something, but it was about the integration. And basically Bryant was hampered at Alabama because Wallace was governor. And it was like in 67 or 68, there was 4 black players that wanted to volunteer for the team. And Bryant said, okay, you can volunteer as walk-ons. He said, I can't give you scholarships. And they said every day he was going to practice, he'd see these kids and encourage them. And he wanted them to make the team. And they were going to make it, but something happened with family. I had to drop out of school. And that held Alabama back several years before they could start recruiting black players. Mm-hmm. But and they say that's the reason he scheduled Southern Cal that year when they beat Alabama 42-21. Mm-hmm. Is to show what was happening. And one of the funny stories, one of these, Pat Dye was the recruiting coordinator, and he was trying to recruit this black athlete. And one of the boosters said, he's not coming to Alabama. And Dye said, if he signs the letter of intent, he will. That's who should have been Alabama's coach.
Talking about behind Bryant?
Dye. When Dye took the Auburn job, Bryant called him and said, what the hell are you doing? And he said, well, I'm taking this job, coach. And he said, no, you're going to be the coach here. And he goes, coach, I'm not going to be the coach there. There's too many people in front of me that played and coached. And he said, well, you're not ever going to beat me. And he said, well, hell, you're not going to coach forever. You know what got Dye the job? What sealed it for him? They asked him when they was interviewing him how long it would take him to beat Alabama. And he replied, 60 minutes.
That's great. Well, man, are you about ready to wrap this thing up?
Yeah, we kind of went off,
yeah.
It's okay for a first one.
Might have to edit some of the rambling out or something.
Yeah. I'll say what if you want to next time. It's kind of like, we're focused on some, but let's talk about, give us something to study on. Coaches nationally, it's on the hot seat this year. People who are safe, and just do one on coaches. You want to do that?
That'll be a
Okay.
good format. Yeah.
All right, buddy. We'll talk soon.
All right, man.